right. So we're here to talk about the lesson that I observed where you were teaching long division to your students. Um, First, I want to say I loved that you started the lesson with vocabulary. I thought that was really great that the students had to decipher the word and then you had them read the definition. Um, have you, so was this day one, day two of the?
This was day 2.5. We had a weird testing day in there. So this was, I would say I was closer with that class, closer to what I would do on a normal day too. So before we did that vocabulary that you saw where we were reading it and question and responding to it, we actually filled out a page and they saw the definition and then we rewrote the definition and then they drew a picture of what the definition would look like. So they were words that we were reviewing that we had talked about before.
Okay, because I felt like they knew the words really well. Um, and so, like, as you started the lesson, what do you think went well with it?
I think I did pretty good at engaging almost all the kids and monitoring well. There are a couple of things I felt that I was like, I could have done a little better. A couple of the kids kept wanting to use the same strategy that they had learned the day before that you saw me go over at the beginning of the lesson. And thinking back on it now, I really wish I would have been more, no, let's try this strategy before going back to that strategy. Because I think the last strategy that I used is going to get them closer to long division.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the one where you drew the picture?
Yeah.
Yes, they were really, really excited about drawing the picture. So you did that on day one?
Yes, all we did on day one was vocabulary, and we talked about what is division, why do we divide, what do we need to divide, what are words that mean divide. And then after doing that, we did long division with drawing pictures like this. And so circling groups of the divisor. And I have some of my lower kids just love this method and won't move past it. And I wasn't very hey, no, we're learning a new one, but you can use that one later. And I kept letting them use this one. And so I don't think I'm much closer with long division on those kids as I was before.
I will say they were really excited about that, and I really love that strategy. Do you think at this point they could have done this strategy by themselves?
I think everybody in my room can use this one by themselves.
Okay. Because they were right on it when you were, what are we doing next? And they were like, draw the tens. So that was really impressive for them. And I really liked the strategy. And I loved how you brought them to the board to circle the divide, like what you're dividing. What's one thing that you wish would have went differently in?
The middle, so I go from this one to partial quotients, kind of, in a way, like a altered partial quotients to what we called last year the trick-or-treat method, but I believe when you and I talked previously when I was trying to find more research on it, it was called the grid method or something like that. And so the middle step is where I was trying to solidify that we're dealing with place value, but I don't feel like that's solidified.
And that was one of the only parts in the lesson where, as I was watching, I understood it because I know what was coming. There were some places where I felt like you could have reinforced because I know the basic facts is going over expanded notation and partial product. I felt like on that division problem, I believe it was 896 divided by 4, you could have reinforced that the 800 plus the 80 plus the 16 equals the 896, which would have tied I think everything together.
Yeah.
So that was the only part where I was like, oh, but then after that, they seemed to pick up on it and they were able to do it by themselves. So that was really.
Yeah, I think that in that class I had 3 kids that still, by the time we were done with that method, didn't get that method. But it's because they keep trying to go back to this method. But I mean, my philosophy with my kids is as long as you understand one method and roll with it.
Yeah. How do you think you could get them off this method if partial quotient isn't working?
I think the grid method will eventually work with them if they really put their effort into the grid method. Because the grid method is extremely similar to long division. It's just instead of going down, it's going over.
Right.
And it's, to me, less messy
Yes.
than long division. And so the kids can't get things out of line and stuff like that. So I think if I kind of reinforce that doing this is doing the exact same thing as the grid method, you're just doing it with numbers, I think that might help them get past it. I think my students, the 3 students that I'm thinking of, are very drawn to pictures in general all the time. Everything we do, they draw pictures. They count, they draw dots for their counting. They cross out things, just adding and subtracting. They cross out. So if this is how they're going to understand division right now, I'm okay with this.
Right.
I hope by the end of 4th grade, they're past this. But the fact that they've gotten this one right now is baffling me.
Right. I mean, I was really impressed because they were like, no, do this. So
the only hiccup that I see in this one is I have 2 students who they corrected it that day, and I'm hoping it stays corrected, is when they move these over, they make the middle one add up to the 20 they're moving over, and they forget that they already have some there. So instead of being 20, this should be 23, and they'll forget to add those 3 more that they had.
Yeah, I did notice your student was like, hey, that's not supposed to be there. So
yeah. But I think we got that fixed. And it was just a method of letting them do it multiple times and seeing, hey, why is mine not adding up?
Right. So I noticed on the next part when you were moving towards partial quotient and towards the grid method, you used a T-chart. And I really liked that you gave them different strategies. I believe it was the 3 T-chart of drawing the 3 dots. One thing that I did notice is you could also do touch points. Do you know about touch point numbers?
Yeah.
So that's a great strategy for kids who are struggling with that. Just something as you were doing it, I was like, oh, she could do touch points too.
Yeah,
so.
I like touch points. I wish touch points were reinforced a lot more in the lower grades because, I mean, like I told one of my students, with their 3s and their 4s, I tell them to use their fingers because they have 3 spaces in their fingers.
I love that
they
strategy
have 4
too.
lines in their fingers that they count the tip. So I taught one of my students that, and she was like, "Oh, that's cool." But I don't know. Even as an adult, I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, the 3s, I'm like, okay, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah. So I'm with you. That's a good idea because we put the divisor out to the side, and if I taught them the touch points, they could, instead of drawing the dots, they could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a good point.
So that was another thing I just noticed, and I was like, that could be another strategy she could implement. So moving forward from this method, you said tomorrow you're going to move into the grid method.
We're going to finish the grid method tomorrow and move on to long division.
Okay.
So
so you said your students are already struggling with, or some of them anyways, are struggling to go from picture to partial quotient. You think it's going to go better moving from?
I think picture to, because I did the grid method at the end of the video also, and it's better because they weren't quite understanding like the zeros in the partial quotient. And we've talked about long division a lot this year because it's an important TEK that we've been hitting and we've been reviewing. And so I'm hoping that without like just putting the 8, the 2, and the 5, instead of putting 820 and 5, will kind of just help them see that that's exactly what they were already doing when we were going over long division.
All right.
I'm hoping that not going over partial quotients again and skipping straight to the grid method will be a little easier for them, especially since we use the T-chart. So that's my goal.
So moving forward with your students who are still struggling, if they don't get the grid method, what do you propose you're going to do?
I'm probably just going to let them use this until they have 100% solidified this, and then pull them in a small group and show them, like, look, like this is exactly like doing this. But until they can feel confident in doing division in general, and if once they get confident in this, I feel like I could push them a little harder. But I will probably let them continue to do the drawing method of it until I will keep reiterating and pushing them and, trying to get them to use the other, but I don't feel any kids are successful until they have confidence in the base, and this would be the base. So
do you think using manipulatives would change that, where they could like physically, or
I think showing them manipulatives and doing it once or twice with manipulatives would be great. My holdup on manipulatives right now is because we go into big numbers. Having enough for all kids. Thanks, COVID. But also, I want to try to give them strategies that they can use like later in life. And so I use manipulatives. I usually use the manipulatives at the beginning of a lesson. So like the first day we did this, we did manipulatives for 2 problems, and then we went straight into drawing it. So we went from concrete to semi-concrete, and then tomorrow when we start long division, it will be abstract. And I don't necessarily like to continue to give manipulatives after showing the manipulatives, because
right?
I mean, you have a piece of paper everywhere you go. You don't necessarily have hundreds of blocks in your pocket.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think it would be a good idea for when I do go from this to the grid method or this to long division to have those manipulatives to show them better.
Okay. So, thinking about the future, when do you propose like your kids are going to take this test?
They are going to take this test next Wednesday. So we have Thursday and Friday, and then Monday and Tuesday. But we're not solidifying just long division that whole time. So part of those days are going to be interpreting what the remainder means. So they'll do some checks on tomorrow and Friday on if they understand division in general. Because on Friday we will start interpreting remainders.
Okay. So plans with that, are you going to bring back out the manipulatives, or are you just going to stay with maybe a semi-concrete?
For interpreting remainders?
Yes.
I always bring out manipulatives, but I don't bring out these kind of manipulatives. Like I have counting bears, and so I always use something a little more realistic to what the problems are talking about. So like if the problem's talking about people, we use counting bears. If the problem's talking about apples and oranges, we use red blocks and orange blocks. Because I feel like the reason why we can't interpret remainders well is because the kids don't understand that it is a thing. They want to think of it as a number.
Right.
And so getting them to solidify, oh, we can't leave one little bear on the curb. It has to have a seat, is more solidifying, in my opinion, than saying, oh, well, it's just a number.
All right. Okay. Sounds great. So, do you have any kids right now that you feel like have mastered long division? And
yes, and there were a couple that were doing the grid method that had mastered it. And so when I checked their assignment, like when I checked their problem and they got it right, I didn't even have to help them. The student who sits right here actually did the grid method in his head multiple times, and he would help anybody that would let him. But like with him, I turned it over and I gave him bigger numbers to divide to see if he could do the grid method in the thousands and the 10,000s and things like that. And then tomorrow when we do long division, if he's still flying through long division, I'll give him a 2-digit divisor, which is a 5th grade teak. It's not even a 4th grade teak. So I'll give him a 2-digit divisor. Do a quick mini lesson on what it means to have a 2-digit divisor, and then see if he can figure that out on his own and kind of push him outside of his box of easy.
Okay. Sounds like a good plan moving forward.
Yeah.
Are there any misconceptions other than the interpreting remainders that you feel might occur?
I'm hoping not. I haven't had any in the past that really stand out to me. And when it comes to long division, I'm a little worried about the acronym we use of divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. I did see online where they took they didn't use divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. They didn't use the multiply part.
Okay.
Because they said that it just confused their kids because they already knew what went into it. Like they already knew that it should have been a 6 on the bottom. So they just divide, subtract, bring down.
Yeah. That might help them be successful then. Because I do notice that also. As they get confused of why am I multiplying when this is supposed to be division.
Yeah, so. Like where's the multiplying come in? What does it mean? Why?
Mm-hmm.
So I saw that the other day, like just take out the subtract part or take out the multiply part, especially when using T-charts, because when we use the T-charts, we teach them what goes on top. What is on top goes on top. What is on bottom goes on bottom. And by bottom, we mean under the number to subtract.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess moving forward, I definitely want to check back in with you to see how your kids are doing and offer any help that you may need. But thank you for letting me observe you.
You're welcome.